A black judge walks into her own courthouse, only to be blocked by two white officers. They grab her wrist, refuse to believe her ID, and humiliate her before a stunned crowd. Then the courtroom doors swing open. Let her go. Minutes later, she slams her gavel and fires them on the spot. But that's just the beginning. The system fights back with smears, threats, and a scandal meant to destroy her. Will she be silenced, or will she bring down the corruption that tried to break her? Stay tuned, this battle will shake the justice system to its core. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The city lights twinkled through Vanessa's apartment windows, casting long shadows across her living room. She sat curled up on her leather armchair, her laptop balanced on her knees. The screen's harsh glow illuminated her face as she scrolled through article after article, each headline hitting her like a physical blow. "Judge Langley's reckless power play, has she gone too far?" screamed one headline from the City Herald. Her finger hesitated over the trackpad before clicking. The article was worse than she expected, filled with anonymous sources questioning her judgment, her integrity, even her sanity. Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to maintain the composure she was known for in the courtroom. But here, alone in her apartment, the mask began to crack. Her hand trembled slightly as she clicked on another article. "City in turmoil as Judge Langley faces investigation." The words blurred together as she read. Sources close to the investigation suggest Judge Langley's recent decisions show a pattern of judicial overreach. She knew exactly who those sources were: Morrison's people, spreading their poison through carefully planted stories. The carefully orchestrated attack bore all the hallmarks of his behind-the-scenes manipulation. Her phone buzzed on the side table, making her jump. Judge Marcus Peterson's name flashed on the screen. Finally, someone she could talk to. Marcus had been her mentor when she first joined the bench, the one who'd encouraged her to stand firm in her principles. "Marcus," she answered, relief evident in her voice. "I'm so glad you—" "Vanessa." His voice was flat, distant, nothing like the warm, encouraging tone she remembered. I can't be seen talking to you. I'm sorry." The line went dead before she could respond. Vanessa stared at her phone, the screen growing dark. The silence in her apartment seemed to press in around her. The betrayal stung worse than any courtroom defeat. Her fingers moved automatically, scrolling through her contacts. Judge Sarah Chen. They'd had lunch together just last week, laughing about their shared experiences as women on the bench. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Sarah, it's Vanessa. I could really use a friendly voice right now. Please call me back." She tried to keep the desperation out of her voice, but it crept in anyway. Next, she tried David Thompson, a fellow judge she'd known for 15 years. They'd worked together on numerous committees, shared countless cups of coffee in their chambers, celebrated each other's victories. "The number you have reached is not accepting calls at this time." Vanessa's chest tightened. She tried another number, then another. Each call met with silence, voicemail, or hurried excuses before disconnecting. With each rejection, the weight of her isolation grew heavier, crushing the air from her lungs. Her phone buzzed again, a text message this time. Unknown number. Her heart quickened as she opened it. "You should have stayed in your place." The words glowed menacingly on her screen. Vanessa's hand shook as she placed the phone face down on the table. She knew what they meant by "your place." The quiet, compliant judge who looked the other way, who didn't ask uncomfortable questions about certain cases, who didn't challenge the status quo. A place Morrison had carefully designed for judges like her. Rising from her chair, Vanessa moved through her apartment, checking each window lock, then the deadbolt on her front door. The city lights that usually brought her comfort now felt exposing, as if countless unseen eyes were watching her every move. She drew the curtains tight, shutting out the world that had turned against her. Back in her living room, she picked up her phone again, staring at the list of contacts, people she'd considered friends, allies, colleagues she'd trusted. Now they were just a list of names, each one representing another closed door, another person choosing safety over principle. Morrison's influence ran deeper than she'd imagined. She thought of her father, the civil rights attorney who taught her that justice was worth fighting for. Sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, he'd told her. But he'd never told her how much it would hurt, how the loneliness would seep into her bones like winter cold. The laptop screen had gone dark, but she could still see those headlines burned into her mind. Is this the end of Judge Vanessa Langley? Maybe that's what Morrison and his cronies wanted, for her to feel this isolated, this vulnerable, to make her question everything she'd fought for, to break her spirit before breaking her career. Vanessa gripped her phone tightly, its cold surface grounding her in reality. The silence of her apartment pressed in around her, broken only by the distant sound of city traffic below. For the first time since she'd taken on this fight, since she'd decided to challenge Morrison's corrupt empire, she felt truly alone. She sat there in the growing darkness, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline to a world that had suddenly turned its back on her. The anonymous threat lingered in her mind. You should have stayed in your place. But even now, even feeling more isolated than she'd ever felt before, Vanessa knew she couldn't have stayed silent. She couldn't have played by their rules, couldn't have become another piece in Morrison's corrupt game. The city lights continued to twinkle outside her window, indifferent to her situation. Inside her apartment, Judge Vanessa Langley, known for her strength and unwavering principles, sat alone in the darkness, facing the hardest night of her career. Yet somewhere beneath the fear and isolation, a small flame of defiance still burned. Morrison might have the power today, but tomorrow would bring another battle, one she wasn't ready to concede. The courthouse was eerily quiet at this late hour. Vanessa's footsteps echoed through the empty marble halls as she made her way back to her chambers. She'd told the security guard she'd forgotten some important files, but the truth was she never left. She needed answers, and she knew they were hidden somewhere in these walls, buried beneath layers of procedure and protocol. Her office felt different in the darkness. The single desk lamp cast strange shadows across the wood-paneled walls, making the room feel smaller, more confining. The familiar space that represented her authority during daylight hours now seemed to close in around her. Vanessa shrugged off her blazer and rolled up her sleeves. She had work to do, and she wouldn't rest until she found what she was looking for. She pulled open her filing cabinet, methodically removing stacks of case files. Recent police misconduct cases, judicial reviews, disciplinary hearings. She spread them across her desk like pieces of a puzzle. The paper rustled loudly in the silence as she arranged them chronologically, each document potentially holding a clue to the mystery she was determined to solve. There has to be a pattern, she muttered, running her finger down a list of dates. Her eyes were tired, burning from strain, but she couldn't stop. Not now. Not when she was being systematically isolated and attacked. Not when everything she'd worked for was at stake. The first few hours yielded nothing but frustration. Case after case showed the same outcome. Dismissed, charges dropped, officers cleared of wrongdoing. It was the kind of injustice that had driven her to become a judge in the first place, to fight against a system that protected its own at the expense of truth. But something about these dismissals felt different, more calculated. Vanessa reached for her coffee cup, finding it empty for the third time. She stood up to stretch, her joints protesting after hours of hunching over documents. The wall clock read 11:47 p.m. Outside her window, the city sparkled, oblivious to the corruption she was trying to unravel, its lights twinkling like stars against the darkness. She returned to her desk, pulling another stack of files closer. These were older cases, some dating back 5 years. As she flipped through them, two names caught her eye. Officer Grant, Officer Lewis. She'd seen these names before, and a chill ran down her spine. Her heart began to race as she pulled out more files. There they were again and again. Different cases, different victims, same officers, same outcome, dismissed. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence, too perfect to be chance. Vanessa grabbed a legal pad and began making notes, her hand moving quickly across the yellow paper. Officer Grant and Officer Lewis appeared in 12 separate misconduct cases over the past 5 years. Excessive force, racial profiling, evidence tampering, serious allegations, all of them dropped or dismissed before they could go to trial, before justice could be served. "This can't be coincidence," she whispered, her pen moving faster across the paper. She noted dates, case numbers, patterns in the types of complaints. But something else was nagging at her, something she couldn't quite place, like a shadow at the edge of her vision. She pulled out the dismissal orders, laying them side by side. That's when she saw it. At the bottom of each order, in elegant, practiced strokes, Judge Richard Morrison's signature. The sight of it made her stomach tighten. Vanessa's hands trembled slightly as she counted. Every single case involving Grant and Lewis had been dismissed by Morrison. 12 cases, 12 dismissals, all by the same judge. The connection was undeniable, the implication devastating. She remembered Morrison's smug smile in the courthouse hallways, his carefully cultivated image of dignity and wisdom, the way younger judges looked up to him, seeking his approval, his mentorship. How many young judges had he mentored? How many careers had he influenced? How long had he been protecting corrupt officers, building his network of loyal followers? The evidence was there in black and white. Morrison hadn't just dismissed these cases. He'd sealed them, buried them so deep that nobody would think to look. He'd created a perfect system of protection and privilege. But he hadn't counted on someone like Vanessa, someone willing to stay late and dig through old files, someone who couldn't be intimidated or bought. She pulled out her phone and began taking photos of the documents, her hands steady despite her racing thoughts. Each click of the camera felt like another nail in Morrison's coffin. This was why they were trying to destroy her. This was why the media had turned against her. She'd gotten too close to their operation, threatened to expose the rot at the core. The wall clock chimed midnight, the sound startling in the quiet room. Vanessa looked at the evidence spread across her desk. Years of corruption laid bare under her desk lamp. Her hand clenched into a fist, crumpling the notepad paper she was holding. Anger and determination surged through her veins. Now she understood. It wasn't just about her ruling against those officers. It was about what that ruling threatened to expose, a system of protection that went all the way to the top. Morrison hadn't just been dismissing cases. He'd been maintaining an empire built on silence and intimidation, a kingdom where justice was nothing but a word. Vanessa sat back in her chair, her eyes moving over the damning collection of documents before her. Her fist remained tight, knuckles white with determination. The truth was finally clear, and she knew exactly why they were after her. They weren't just trying to silence one judge, they were protecting an entire corrupt system, and she was the only one standing in their way. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse's tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Vanessa's heels clicked purposefully as she strode down the corridor, her spine straight and her head held high. The manila folder in her hands felt heavy with the weight of truth it contained. Evidence that could bring Morrison's corrupt empire crashing down like a house of cards. Her heart beat steadily, each step bringing her closer to confrontation. After a sleepless night piecing together the connections, she was ready. The pattern was clear as day. Morrison had been protecting corrupt officers for years, dismissing case after case of police misconduct, leaving victims without justice and perpetrators emboldened. As she rounded the corner toward the main hall, a buzz of voices and camera flashes caught her attention. Her steps slowed. Through the gathering crowd of reporters and courthouse staff, she could see Judge Morrison standing at a podium, his silver hair catching the morning light, his face a mask of grave concern. His expensive suit and practiced posture screamed authority. "The integrity of our judicial system is sacred," Morrison's voice boomed through the speakers, carrying authority and false righteousness. "It pains me deeply to stand here today." His words echoed off the marble walls, commanding attention. Vanessa froze mid-step, her fingers tightening around the folder until her knuckles turned white. The crowd before her had their backs turned, all attention focused on Morrison's performance, hanging on his every word. Judge Vanessa Langley's recent actions have shown a disturbing pattern of reckless behavior, Morrison continued, his voice dripping with manufactured sadness. Her decisions have not only endangered the proper functioning of this court, but have also undermined the very principles of justice we are sworn to uphold. Each word was a carefully placed dagger, aimed directly at her reputation. A cameraman shifted, giving Vanessa a clear view of Morrison's face on the mounted TV screens. His expression was perfectly crafted, concerned, authoritative, trustworthy. But she could see through it now, see the calculated manipulation behind every word, the slight gleam in his eyes that betrayed his enjoyment of this moment. The crowd nodded along, reporters scribbling frantically in their notepads. Morrison had them all in the palm of his hand, playing them like the master manipulator he was. Some even murmured in agreement, already passing judgment without hearing her side. Therefore, it is with great regret that I must call for an official review of Judge Langley's fitness to serve on this bench. Morrison's words hit her like physical blows, but she didn't flinch. We cannot allow personal vendettas and unchecked behavior to compromise the sanctity of our courts. His voice quavered with false emotion, a performance worthy of an award. Vanessa's jaw tightened. The irony of his words would have been almost funny if it weren't so infuriating. Here he was, the architect of corruption, positioning himself as the defender of justice, while destroying the career of someone who actually fought for it. A few heads in the crowd turned, finally noticing her presence. Whispers rippled through the gathering like wind through tall grass. She could feel their stares, see the judgment in their eyes. They were already convinced, already turned against her, their minds poisoned by Morrison's carefully crafted narrative. Morrison's gaze found her across the hall, and for a brief moment their eyes locked. She saw the flash of satisfaction in his expression, the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. He thought he had won. His eyes held a message only she could read: checkmate. So it's war, Vanessa whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the continued press conference. The folder in her hands contained enough evidence to expose him, but she knew now wasn't the time. Morrison had orchestrated this perfectly. Any attempt to counter him now would look like desperate retaliation from a cornered animal. The reporters were starting to turn toward her, cameras shifting in her direction like predators sensing weakness. Morrison's voice droned on in the background, listing her supposed transgressions, each word carefully chosen to paint her as unstable and dangerous, a threat to the system rather than its potential savior. Vanessa took a deep breath, straightened her blazer with one hand, and turned away from the circus Morrison had created. She walked back the way she came, her steps measured and controlled. She could hear the murmurs behind her, could practically feel the cameras following her retreat, capturing what they thought was her moment of defeat. But this wasn't retreat. This was strategic withdrawal. Morrison might have won this round with his surprise attack, but he had no idea what was coming. He thought he was dealing with a judge who'd crossed a line. He was about to learn he was dealing with a warrior who'd spent her entire career preparing for exactly this kind of battle, who knew how to weather storms and emerge stronger. As she walked away from the main hall, her mind was already working, planning her next move. Morrison had chosen to make this public, fine, but he'd forgotten one crucial thing. The truth had a way of coming out, and she had the receipts. Every case he'd buried, every officer he'd protected, every victim he'd silenced, it was all documented in her files. The morning light followed her down the corridor, and despite everything, despite the public humiliation Morrison had just orchestrated, Vanessa's steps didn't falter. He wanted war? She would give him war. But she would do it her way, methodical, precise, and absolutely devastating. Not for vengeance, but for justice. The evidence in her folder wasn't just about two corrupt officers anymore. It was about a system, a network of corruption that Morrison had carefully built over decades, and she was going to dismantle it piece by piece in broad daylight, until there was nothing left of his empire but the truth he had worked so hard to bury. The evening sky had turned a deep purple outside Vanessa's apartment windows as she sat rigid on her leather couch, remote control gripped tightly in her hand. The TV screen flickered silently before her, its muted images casting dancing shadows across her face. She didn't need the sound to know what was coming. She'd been bracing for this all day, ever since her clerk had warned her about the special report scheduled for tonight. Taking a deep breath, she pressed the volume button. The anchor's polished voice filled her living room, smooth and practiced, dripping with fake objectivity. "Good evening. Tonight, we bring you an exclusive investigation into Judge Vanessa Langley. Is she really the champion of justice she claims to be? Or is she a dangerous radical threatening the very fabric of our legal system? The anchor's perfect smile never wavered as she delivered the carefully crafted attack. Vanessa's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching beneath her skin. The hit piece began with footage of her most recent rulings, edited to make her measured responses look harsh and aggressive. They showed clips of her questioning police officers on the stand, but conveniently left out the damning evidence that had prompted her tough stance. The camera angles were deliberately chosen to make her appear intimidating, her reasonable questions twisted into hostile interrogations. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, more notifications from social media, no doubt. She'd stopped checking hours ago when the first wave of hate messages started flooding in. The damage control could wait until morning. The anchor's voice took on a dramatic tone, the kind reserved for exposing scandalous secrets. But to understand Judge Langley's apparent bias against law enforcement, we need to look deeper into her past, or rather her family's past. Vanessa's heart stopped, her fingers turning white around the remote. She knew what was coming next, had dreaded this moment since the day she took her oath as a judge. The screen filled with a mugshot she hadn't seen in years but could never forget. Her brother's young face stared back at her, his eyes hollow, his expression defeated. Terrence had been just 19, a college sophomore with dreams bigger than the world would allow. This is Terrence Langley, Judge Langley's younger brother, arrested in 2005 for armed robbery. The anchor's voice dripped with false concern, each word calculated for maximum impact. While the charges were eventually dropped, sources close to the case suggest that evidence disappeared under mysterious circumstances. "Liars," Vanessa whispered, her nails digging into her palms until tiny crescents formed in her skin. The truth was so different from their carefully constructed narrative. Terrence had been walking home from his night shift when police stopped him, claiming he matched the description of a robbery suspect. They'd planted evidence in his backpack, something that came out months later when another officer finally came forward, unable to live with his conscience, but the damage had been done. Terrence spent 3 months in jail before being cleared. His scholarship was revoked. His dreams of medical school evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. And now, years later, they were using his pain as ammunition against her, twisting his trauma into a weapon aimed at her career. The segment continued relentlessly, like a well-oiled machine designed to destroy reputations. Multiple sources within the courthouse, speaking on condition of anonymity, paint a troubling picture of Judge Langley's behavior on the bench. The screen switched to shadowed figures, their voices distorted to protect their supposed identities. "She's always had it out for cops," one claimed, the electronic warble unable to hide the smugness in their tone. "Everyone knows she's pushing an agenda." Another voice chimed in, equally disguised but unmistakably hostile. "She's unstable, unpredictable. She lets her personal feelings cloud her judgment." Vanessa watched as they systematically dismantled her reputation, twisting every fair ruling she'd made into evidence of bias. They questioned her qualifications, despite her graduating top of her class. They scrutinized her appointments to the bench, implying she was chosen to fill a quota, rather than earning her position through years of dedicated work and exceptional legal expertise. Social media updates scrolled across the bottom of the screen, showing how quickly the narrative was spreading like wildfire through a drought-stricken forest. Judge Langley bias was trending. People she'd never met were sharing opinions about her character, her motivations, her fitness to serve. The court of public opinion was in session, and they'd already decided her fate. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from a colleague. "Watching the news. I'm so sorry, Vanessa." The words glowed on her screen, well-meaning but hollow. Sorry wasn't enough. Sorry wouldn't undo the damage. Sorry wouldn't protect the next innocent person who came before her court seeking justice. Sorry was what people said when they didn't want to get involved. The segment took another turn, diving deeper into its manufactured controversy. Sources close to Judge Langley suggest her recent controversial rulings may be part of a personal vendetta against law enforcement, stemming from her brother's arrest. More anonymous quotes followed, each one carefully crafted to paint her as an activist judge with an axe to grind. They played clips of her most heated courtroom moments, stripped of context and carefully edited to make her look unhinged. Every raised eyebrow, every firm word became evidence of their narrative. Vanessa's hand shook as she reached for the remote. She'd seen enough. The screen went black with a soft click, leaving her in the growing darkness of her apartment. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, like a thick blanket trying to smother her. Her phone sat on the coffee table, Terrence's number just a few taps away. She picked it up, thumb hovering over his contact. She could almost hear his voice, the words he'd say if she called, the same conversation they'd had so many times before. "You told me not to fight back when they came for me," he'd remind her, his voice tight with old pain and new understanding. "You said we had to work within the system. And now look, they're coming for you too." She'd been so young then, so naive, fresh out of law school with her head full of ideals. She'd believed that if they just followed the rules, if they worked hard enough and proved themselves beyond reproach, the system would protect them. She'd built her career on that belief, fighting for justice from within, making change one ruling at a time, one small victory after another. Vanessa set the phone down without making the call. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting it out slowly through pursed lips. The air felt different now, charged with something beyond anger or frustration. This wasn't just about her career anymore. It wasn't even about Morrison and his corruption. This was war. A war fought not with weapons but with words, with evidence, with truth. They thought they could break her with their smear campaign, their edited clips, their anonymous sources. They thought dragging her brother's past into the light would make her back down, make her question herself, make her fall in line. They were wrong. She opened her eyes, staring at her reflection in the dark TV screen. The woman looking back at her wasn't defeated. She was determined, her shoulders straight, her chin lifted. Morrison and his allies had just made a crucial mistake. They'd reminded her exactly why she became a judge in the first place. Not to play their game, but to change the rules entirely. The midnight air hung heavy and still in the courthouse parking lot. Vanessa's shoulders ached from hours of hunching over case files, searching for anything she might have missed. The day's battles had left her drained, but her mind still raced with strategies and countermoves, like a chess player who couldn't stop seeing the board. Her heels clicked against the concrete in a steady rhythm, the sound sharp and lonely in the empty lot. The parking lot lights cast long shadows between the scattered cars, creating pools of darkness that seemed to stretch and shift with each step she took. She'd stayed later than usual, waiting until the building had emptied completely. These days, she couldn't trust casual encounters with colleagues in the hallways. Too many whispers stopped when she entered a room. Too many conversations shifted when she approached. Approaching her car, Vanessa reached into her purse for her keys. The familiar beep of the car unlock echoed off the concrete walls. But as she reached for the door handle, something caught her eye. A white rectangle tucked beneath her windshield wiper, stark against the dark glass. Her hand froze mid-reach. In all her years on the bench, she'd received threats before, letters, emails, angry voicemails. But this was different. This was personal. Someone had been here, waiting, knowing which car was hers. Someone who had watched her routine, studied her habits. Vanessa glanced around the parking lot, her eyes scanning the shadows between the columns. Nothing moved. The security camera in the corner blinked its red light steadily, but she knew from experience that the footage would show nothing useful. Whoever had left the envelope would have known about the cameras too. These weren't amateurs she was dealing with. With careful movements, she reached for the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, not the kind of stationery an angry citizen would use for a random threat. She slid it free from under the wiper blade, noting how cleanly it had been placed. No creases, no bends. Professional. Deliberate. The night air felt suddenly colder as she unfolded the paper inside. 5 words stared back at her in bold black letters. "Go quietly, or we'll make you." Her breath caught in her throat. The words seemed to pulse on the page, each letter a testament to how far her enemies would go to stop her. The message wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. One made by people who believed they had the power to follow through. A car engine rumbled somewhere in the darkness, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. Vanessa's head snapped up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She couldn't pinpoint the direction. The echo made it impossible to tell where the sound was coming from. Then headlights pierced the darkness at the far end of the lot. They flashed once, bright and deliberate, before plunging back into darkness. The message was clear. "We're watching you. We know you're alone." Vanessa's fingers tightened on the paper, crinkling its pristine surface. Her mind raced through her options. The police? No. She'd seen too many cases, knew too well how reports like this could be buried or dismissed. Besides, after her recent rulings, she doubted many officers would be eager to help her. Some might even be part of this. The engine sound grew fainter, then faded entirely. But the weight of unseen eyes remained, pressing down on her shoulders like a physical force. With movements that betrayed none of her inner turmoil, Vanessa carefully folded the note along its original creases. She opened her purse, the expensive leather one she'd bought to celebrate her appointment to the bench, and slipped the paper inside. Evidence, her mind whispered. Everything was evidence now. Everything was part of the case she was building, even if she didn't yet know against whom. The car door felt heavier than usual as she pulled it open. The familiar leather seat offered little comfort as she settled behind the wheel. Her hands didn't shake as she turned the key in the ignition. Years of maintaining composure in the courtroom had taught her how to keep her exterior calm, even when her insides were churning with fear and anger. As she pulled out of her parking space, Vanessa's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. The parking lot remained still and empty behind her, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every parked car could contain watching eyes. Every corner could conceal someone waiting. The drive home would be different tonight. Each glance in the rearview mirror carried new weight. Each turn required extra vigilance. The routine journey she'd made thousands of times had transformed into something else. A game of cat and mouse where she wasn't sure how many cats were out there in the darkness. Her eyes darted to the mirror again. Empty street again. Still clear. Again. Nothing visible in the darkness behind her headlights. But she kept checking every few seconds, her neck tightening with the repetitive motion. The city street slid past her windows, the familiar route now feeling alien and hostile. Streetlights cast intermittent glows across her dashboard, each flash making the shadows between them seem darker. The late-night traffic was sparse, every passing car a potential threat, every red light an opportunity for someone to catch up to her. The note sat in her purse like a live thing, its presence impossible to ignore. Those 5 words carried the weight of everything she'd fought against throughout her career: the corruption, the intimidation, the casual expectation that she would know her place and stay in it. But they had miscalculated. They thought threats would make her back down, make her go quietly. They didn't understand that every attempt to silence her only strengthened her resolve. Each shadow in her rearview mirror, each threatening note, each smear campaign, they all proved that she was getting too close to something they desperately wanted to hide. And Vanessa Langley had never backed down from a fight in her life, especially when justice hung in the balance. Her eyes flicked to the mirror again. Still clear. Again. Nothing visible. Again. Just darkness and distant headlights. The rhythm of her surveillance continued, a new habit born of necessity, a dance of paranoia and precaution that she knew would become part of her daily life. The morning sun hadn't yet risen when Vanessa sat at her kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. The threatening note lay before her, its crisp white paper almost glowing in the dim light of her apartment. She'd read those 7 words so many times they were burned into her memory. Go quietly, or we'll make you. Her usually immaculate apartment showed signs of her sleepless night. Case files scattered across the coffee table, her jacket thrown carelessly over a chair, shoes kicked off by the door. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally perfect posture had given way to exhausted slouching. The home that was usually her sanctuary now felt invaded by the weight of what was happening. She took another sip of the cold coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. The events of the past 2 days played through her mind like a movie she couldn't stop watching. Morrison standing at that podium, his face a mask of false concern as he called for her removal. The media vultures, circling closer with each passing hour, dragging her family's name through the mud. The colleagues who wouldn't meet her eyes, who turned away when she approached. People she'd worked alongside for years, suddenly strangers. For the first time in her career, doubt crept in like a shadow. Maybe they were right. Maybe she had gone too far, pushed too hard. The system she'd fought so hard to change was pushing back with all its might. And she was just one person. One very tired person with seemingly the whole world aligned against her. She picked up the threatening note again, running her thumb along its sharp edge. The paper was expensive. Whoever sent it wanted her to know they had resources. They wanted her to feel small, cornered, alone. A calculated move from someone who knew exactly what buttons to push. And it was working. Her phone buzzed on the table, making her jump. Gabriel's name lit up the screen. She almost didn't answer. What could she possibly say to her idealistic young intern now? But something made her reach for it, perhaps the need to hear a friendly voice in the darkness. "Hello?" Her voice sounded rough even to her own ears. "Judge?" Gabriel's voice crackled with urgency. "I've been trying to reach you all night. Are you okay?" "Gabriel, it's 6 in the morning. You should be sleeping." She tried to sound authoritative, but the concern in his voice touched something inside her. "So should you," he shot back, and despite everything, a small smile tugged at her lips. "I saw the news, all of it. The press conference, the hit pieces, everything." Vanessa sighed, pressing her fingers to her temples. "Then you understand why I'm considering stepping down?" "No!" The force of his response made her sit up straighter. "No, I don't understand, and neither would you. Not the Judge Langley I know." "You don't understand how bad this is, Gabriel." She gestured at the empty room, at the scattered evidence of her unraveling life. "They're not just coming after my career anymore. They're threatening." She stopped herself. No need to worry him more, to drag him further into this mess. "I do understand," he insisted, his voice steady and sure. "I understand that they're scared. They wouldn't be fighting this hard if you weren't getting close to something big. You taught me that, remember? The bigger the pushback, the closer you are to the truth." Vanessa closed her eyes, remembering that conversation from months ago. Gabriel had been discouraged after losing his first major case, and she'd found him in the law library, ready to quit. She'd seen so much of herself in him that day. "And you know what else you taught me?" Gabriel continued. "You don't back down. Not when it matters. Not when you're right." She looked at the note again, but this time, something else caught her eye. A framed photo on her wall. It showed her standing with her father on the day she was sworn in as a judge. His words echoed in her memory. "They'll try to make you doubt yourself, that's how they win." "Judge?" Gabriel's voice brought her back to the present. "Are you still there?" Vanessa straightened her back, feeling something solid and familiar settle in her chest. The same determination that had carried her through law school, through her early days as a public defender, through every battle she'd fought to get to where she was. That fire that had never truly gone out. "I'm here," she said, her voice stronger now. "And you're right." She could hear the smile in Gabriel's voice. "Of course I'm right. I learned from the best." Vanessa stood up, walking to her window. The sky was beginning to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking through the darkness. She picked up her phone again, but this time with purpose, her mind already racing with plans. "I need you to do something for me," she told Gabriel. "Start making calls. I need a press conference. Today." "Already on it," Gabriel replied, and she could hear papers rustling in the background. "They want a war? Let's give them one." As she hung up, Vanessa looked at herself in the window's reflection. She saw exhaustion there, yes, but something else too. The same fire that had driven her all these years, burning brighter than ever. Morrison and his allies thought they could intimidate her into silence. They thought they could bury her under threats and lies. They had underestimated her resolve. They were wrong. She picked up the threatening note one last time, then deliberately tore it in half, letting the pieces fall into her trash bin. Let them come. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice in a system that resisted change. She hadn't backed down then. She wouldn't back down now. The afternoon sun beat down on the courthouse steps as Vanessa adjusted her navy blue blazer, her fingers smoothing out invisible wrinkles. Through the glass doors, she could see the crowd of reporters gathering, their cameras and microphones ready like weapons pointed at a target. Her heart thundered in her chest, but years of courtroom experience had taught her how to keep her exterior calm and controlled. Gabriel stood beside her, clutching a folder of documents. "Are you sure about this, Judge?" "Once you step out there, there's no going back," Vanessa finished his thought, her voice steady. "I know." She took the folder from him, her movements deliberate and precise. Sometimes the only way to fight darkness is to shine a light on it. She pushed open the heavy courthouse doors and immediately, camera flashes erupted like lightning strikes. The reporters surged forward, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of questions. Vanessa walked to the podium with measured steps, her heels clicking against the stone stairs with purpose. The microphones picked up every sound as she arranged her papers, the rustling creating a moment of anticipation. She looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some hostile, all hungry for a story. The summer heat made the air shimmer above the pavement, but Vanessa felt ice in her veins. "For the past few days you've heard lies about me," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. "Let me tell you the truth." The crowd fell silent, pens poised over notepads, cameras recording every word. Judge Richard Morrison, a man who presents himself as a pillar of justice, has been systematically protecting corrupt officers and officials. She held up a document, letting the cameras capture it. "These are sealed case files showing a pattern of dismissed police misconduct cases, every single one signed by Morrison." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Vanessa continued, her voice growing stronger. "Officers Grant and Lewis, who were recently fired for misconduct, have a history of complaints against them. Excessive force, racial profiling, false arrests. Each time Morrison ensured these complaints disappeared." She pulled out another document. "This is a transcript from a case 3 years ago. A young man wrongfully arrested, beaten in custody. Morrison dismissed the case, claiming lack of evidence." Her eyes swept across the crowd. "That young man was my brother, and his case was just one of dozens." The reporters' pens scratched frantically across their notepads. Cameras clicked in rapid succession. Vanessa could feel the story taking shape, transforming from Morrison's carefully crafted narrative into something raw and true. "Since I began investigating these cases, I've received threats." She held up the note from her windshield. "This was left on my car last night. Go quietly, or we'll make you. Well, I have a message for those behind these threats." She gripped the sides of the podium, her knuckles white but her voice never wavering. "I will not be silenced. I will not be intimidated. And I will not step down." The crowd erupted with questions, reporters shouting over each other. "Judge Langley, are you accusing Morrison of criminal conspiracy? Do you have proof of these allegations? What about the claims regarding your brother's criminal history? Are you concerned about retaliation?" Vanessa raised her hand, commanding silence with the same authority she wielded in her courtroom. This system was built to protect the powerful and silence the vulnerable. For too long, we've allowed corruption to hide behind badges and gavels. If they want me gone, they'll have to drag me out. The reporters surged forward again, their questions becoming more urgent, more insistent. But Vanessa had said what she needed to say. She gathered her papers with steady hands, turned away from the podium, and walked back toward the courthouse doors. Camera flashes followed her like strobes, questions echoed off the courthouse walls. But she didn't look back. Her footsteps were measured, her head held high. Through the glass doors, she could see her reflection, a woman who had just declared war on a corrupt system. As the heavy doors closed behind her, muffling the chaos outside, Vanessa allowed herself one deep breath. The battle had officially begun. The marble halls of the courthouse stretched before her, silent witnesses to the gauntlet she had just thrown down. The familiar weight of her evidence folder in her hands reminded her that there was no turning back now. The truth was out there, racing through news feeds and social media, impossible to contain. The afternoon sun streamed through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Vanessa's footsteps echoed in the empty corridor as she walked away from the press conference, leaving the reporters to broadcast her declaration of war to the world. Gabriel caught up with her, his face flushed with a mixture of pride and worry. "You were amazing out there," he whispered, matching her stride. "But Morrison will hit back hard. He has friends everywhere." Vanessa nodded, her expression resolute. "Let him come. We have something he doesn't." "What's that?" Gabriel asked. "The truth," she replied, her voice quiet but firm. "And people who are finally ready to hear it." She paused at the elevator, pressing the button with a steady finger. In the polished metal doors, she caught her reflection again. Tired eyes but an unbending spirit. For years, she had fought this battle in the shadows, case by case, ruling by ruling. Now it was in the open where healing could finally begin. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of the courthouse as Vanessa made her way to her office, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. Despite the exhaustion from yesterday's press conference, she walked with purpose, her spine straight and her head held high. The familiar weight of her leather briefcase felt reassuring in her hand, a small comfort in what had been weeks of uncertainty and fear. As she approached her office, she noticed Linda, her assistant of 7 years, standing frozen in the doorway. The young woman's usually composed face was a mix of shock and disbelief as she stared at her phone screen, her fingers gripping the device so tightly her knuckles had turned white. "They arrested Morrison," Linda said without looking up, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with disbelief. Vanessa stopped in her tracks, her heart skipping a beat. "When?" "Just now, it's breaking news." Linda turned her phone screen toward Vanessa, showing a live news feed. The footage showed Morrison being led out of his home in handcuffs, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled. His silver hair was unkempt and his expensive suit was wrinkled. The man who had terrorized her for months now looked small and defeated, nothing like the powerful figure who had loomed over the courthouse for decades. Vanessa moved past Linda into her office, setting her briefcase down on her desk with trembling hands. She switched on her computer monitor, and immediately, news alerts began popping up on her screen, one after another, like dominoes falling. Judge Morrison detained for questioning following corruption allegations. Senior judge arrested after fellow judge's explosive press conference. Morrison's empire crumbling, police launch full investigation. Linda followed her in, still clutching her phone as if it might disappear. "They're saying it's not just about what you revealed. The police found more, decades of covered-up cases, bribes, threats. It's like they opened a floodgate once they started looking." Vanessa sank into her chair, letting out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The weight of months of fear and isolation began to lift from her shoulders, replaced by a cautious sense of victory. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Her email notification chimed. It was from the Judicial Ethics Committee, the same group that had been ready to crucify her just days ago. Her fingers hovered over the mouse for a moment before she clicked to open it, bracing herself for more bad news. "Notice of suspension hearing delay," read the subject line. The formal language of the memo couldn't hide its real message. They were backing off, at least for now. The vultures were circling a different prey. "They're delaying the hearing," Vanessa said out loud, more to herself than to Linda. "They want to review new evidence and circumstances." She couldn't help the small, bitter laugh that escaped her lips. Linda broke into a wide smile, relief washing over her face. "That's good news, right? They can't suspend you now, not after everything that's come out about Morrison. You were right all along." Vanessa nodded slowly, cautiously allowing herself to believe it. "It gives us time. Time to gather more evidence. Time to—" Her voice trailed off as her office phone began to ring, the shrill sound cutting through the moment of relief. Linda reached for it, but Vanessa held up her hand. Something, instinct perhaps, or the paranoia born from months of threats, made her want to answer it herself. A chill ran down her spine despite the warm sunlight filling the room. She picked up the receiver. Judge Langley speaking. The voice that answered was deep, unfamiliar, and chilling in its calmness. You should have stayed quiet. The line went dead, leaving only the hollow buzz of the dial tone. Vanessa's hand shook as she lowered the phone back to its cradle. The brief moment of triumph she'd felt evaporated, replaced by an icy fear that settled in her stomach like a stone. Her mouth went dry. "Judge?" Linda's concerned voice seemed to come from far away, muffled by the pounding of blood in Vanessa's ears. "What's wrong? Who was that?" Vanessa stared at the phone, her mind racing through possibilities, connections, threats. She'd thought Morrison was the puppet master, the one pulling all the strings. But this voice, this threat, suggested something far more sinister. Morrison wasn't the head of the snake. He was just another puppet, another piece in a much larger game. "Judge?" Linda repeated, more urgently this time, taking a step closer. Vanessa forced herself to look up at her assistant, struggling to keep her voice steady, to maintain the composure she was known for. "It's nothing. Just give me a moment, please." Linda hesitated, clearly wanting to say more, her eyes full of concern, but nodded and left the office, closing the door behind her with a soft click. Alone now, Vanessa looked down at her hand, still trembling slightly. On her computer screen, Morrison's arrest played out in an endless loop of news coverage. She should have felt triumphant, vindicated. Instead, she felt more exposed than ever, like she'd kicked a hornet's nest thinking it was just a single wasp. She reached for her phone, checking that the call recording app she'd installed after the first threat was still running. It was. She played back the brief message, the mysterious voice just as menacing on the recording. "You should have stayed quiet." 5 simple words that carried the weight of a mountain. The morning sun continued to stream through her office windows, but Vanessa felt cold to her core. She'd thought taking down Morrison would end this nightmare. Instead, it seemed she'd only scratched the surface of something much larger and more dangerous, a corruption that ran deeper than she had imagined. Her eyes drifted to the framed law degree on her wall, then to the small photo of her brother on her desk. The reason she'd become a judge in the first place, to fight the injustice that had taken him too soon. She'd fought too hard and come too far to back down now. Someone bigger than Morrison was still out there, still watching from the shadows. But now she knew they existed, and that was something. Knowledge was power, and she'd need every advantage. Vanessa straightened in her chair and pulled out the case files she'd been gathering, her resolve hardening. Morrison's arrest wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. She had work to do, and this time she wouldn't stop until she'd exposed every last one of them. The morning air was crisp as Vanessa pulled into her usual parking spot at the courthouse. Through her windshield, she could see the chaos waiting for her. A sea of reporters, their cameras ready, and crowds of people holding signs both for and against her. She took a deep breath, straightened her navy blazer, and grabbed her briefcase. The moment she opened her car door, the noise hit her like a wave. Camera flashes burst like lightning, and voices called out from every direction. "Judge Langley, do you have a comment about Morrison's arrest?" "Judge, how do you respond to allegations of—" "We stand with you, Judge Langley. Resign now." The courthouse steps had become a battlefield of opposing forces. To her left, supporters held signs reading, "Justice for Judge Langley," and "Truth Prevails." To her right, angry faces thrust signs declaring, "Corrupt judge must go and protect our police." Court security officers formed a protective corridor through the crowd. Officer Martinez, a familiar face she'd seen every morning for the past 5 years, gave her a subtle nod as she passed. At least some people still had her back. Inside the courthouse, the chaos shifted from loud to subtle, but it was no less intense. The usual morning bustle fell into an unnatural hush as she walked through the main hall. Courthouse staff who normally greeted her warmly now found sudden interest in their phones or paperwork. Others watched her openly, their expressions ranging from sympathy to barely concealed hostility. She caught fragments of whispered conversations that stopped abruptly as she passed. "Can't believe Morrison. Should have kept quiet. Asking for trouble." Linda, her assistant, hurried to meet her, clutching a stack of files. Her face was pale with worry. "Judge, I've been trying to reach you. There's something—" But Vanessa had already pushed open her chamber door and frozen in place. The sight knocked the breath from her lungs. Her carefully organized office, the sanctuary where she'd spent countless hours pursuing justice, had been violated. Her heavy oak desk lay on its side, drawers pulled out and contents spilled across the floor. Case files, legal documents, and personal items created a sea of paper and debris. Her leather chair, a gift from her father when she was appointed to the bench, had been slashed repeatedly, stuffing bursting from deep cuts in the material. But what made her blood run cold was the message on the wall, in angry red strokes, dripping slightly as if written in haste. "This isn't over." Linda appeared at her shoulder, gasping at the destruction. "I came in early and found it like this. I called security right away, but—" Vanessa forced herself to breathe slowly, fighting down the surge of fear and anger that threatened to overwhelm her. She'd faced intimidation before, but this was different. This was personal. This was someone sending a message that taking down Morrison wasn't enough to stop them. She surveyed the damage methodically, her legal mind already cataloging every detail. The slashed chair spoke of rage. The overturned desk showed power. But the message, that was meant to inspire fear. Court officers appeared behind her, their radios crackling with activity. "Judge Langley, we need to secure the scene," one said quietly. "This is now an active investigation." Vanessa nodded, her hand steady as she reached for her phone. She scrolled to the security office's number, pressed dial. When the head of security answered, her voice was calm and controlled, despite the chaos surrounding her. "This is Judge Langley. Someone broke into my chambers last night. I need you to find out who did this." She ended the call and turned to face her destroyed office again. Papers rustled under her feet as she took a careful step forward, mindful not to disturb potential evidence. A framed photo of her father lay face down on the floor, its glass cracked. She resisted the urge to pick it up. The red message seemed to pulse on the wall, a taunting reminder that Morrison's arrest hadn't ended this fight. It had only escalated it. Whoever was behind this wanted her to know they could reach her, even here in the courthouse in her own chambers. More people gathered at her door, court officers, cleaning staff, other judges. Their murmurs formed a backdrop of concern and speculation. She could feel their eyes on her, watching for signs of weakness or fear. But Judge Vanessa Langley hadn't gotten where she was by showing weakness. She stood straight, her expression composed, even as her mind raced with implications. Someone had access to the courthouse after hours. Someone knew the security patterns well enough to avoid detection. Someone wanted her to know that Morrison's arrest was just the beginning. She inhaled deeply, her shoulders squaring as she turned to face the growing crowd at her door. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but she wouldn't let it show. Not here, not now. She pulled out her phone again, ready to call security and start the process of finding whoever had done this. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the integrity of the entire justice system, and she would not be intimidated into silence. The mahogany-paneled boardroom felt smaller than usual as Vanessa sat before the State Judicial Council. 7 pairs of eyes studied her from across the long table, their faces a mix of concern, judgment, and barely concealed hostility. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished surface. Judge Malcolm Bennett, a man whose silver hair matched his sterling reputation, adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. His weathered face showed the weight of the moment as he leaned forward, hands clasped together. "Judge Langley, we have serious concerns about your ability to serve," he said, his deep voice carrying authority that filled the room. The words hung heavy in the air, making the tension almost unbearable. Vanessa sat perfectly straight, her dark suit crisp and professional. She'd chosen it carefully this morning, armor for this battle. Her expression remained neutral, but her heart pounded against her ribs. Judge Patricia Reynolds, one of Morrison's closest allies, spoke first. Her thin lips curved into a disapproving frown. "The situation has become untenable. Every news outlet in the state is covering this circus. She's too controversial." "Exactly," Judge William Harris chimed in, his jowls quivering with indignation. "She's turned this courthouse into a battleground. The protests, the media frenzy, it's a disgrace to our institution." "We're facing a crisis of public confidence," added Judge Thomas Drake, another Morrison loyalist. His perfectly manicured hands gestured emphatically. "She's become a political liability we cannot afford." Vanessa watched them build their case against her, noting how they avoided mentioning Morrison's arrest or the evidence she'd presented. Their selective outrage was telling. Judge Bennett turned to her. "Do you have anything to say in your defense, Judge Langley?" The room fell silent. Vanessa could hear the tick of the ancient clock on the wall, counting the seconds. She rose slowly, commanding the space. "Distinguished members of the council," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I understand your concerns about controversy and public perception. But let's be clear about what's really happening here." She paused, meeting each pair of eyes around the table. "I am being punished for exposing corruption. If you suspend me, you're proving everything I said was true." A murmur rippled through the room. Judge Reynolds' face flushed red. Judge Harris shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The public isn't angry because I spoke up," Vanessa continued. "They're angry because they've lost faith in our system. Suspending me won't restore that faith. It will destroy what little remains." Judge Bennett removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "You've put us in a difficult position, Judge Langley." "No," she replied firmly. "Corruption put us in this position. I'm trying to get us out of it." Judge Elena Martinez, who had been quiet until now, cleared her throat. "She has a point. How do we justify suspending her for exposing misconduct, especially now that Judge Morrison has been arrested?" The mention of Morrison's name sent another ripple through the room. His empty chair at the council table seemed to mock them all. "Perhaps," Judge Bennett said slowly, "we should take more time to consider all aspects of this situation." Judge Reynolds practically jumped from her seat. "We can't afford to wait. Every day she remains on the bench damages our credibility." "Our credibility was damaged long before Judge Langley spoke up," Judge Martinez countered. "Maybe it's time we addressed the real issues here." The debate continued, voices rising and falling. Vanessa remained standing, her presence a reminder of everything at stake. She watched as the unified front against her began to crack, uncertainty creeping into faces that moments ago had been set in judgment. Finally, Judge Bennett raised his hand for silence. "I move that we delay the vote on Judge Langley's suspension until we can conduct a more thorough investigation of all claims involved." Judge Reynolds started to protest, but Bennett cut her off. "All in favor?" Hands rose slowly. 4 out of 7, enough to carry the motion. "The vote is delayed," Bennett announced, his tone heavy with finality. "This meeting is adjourned." As the council members gathered their papers and began to file out, Vanessa remained seated. She had won this round, bought herself more time. But the war was far from over. The glares from Morrison's allies told her that much. Judge Bennett was the last to leave. He paused at the door, looking back at her. "I hope you understand what you've started, Judge Langley." "I understand exactly what I'm doing," she replied, her voice firm and unwavering. When the door closed behind him, Vanessa finally allowed herself to exhale. She gathered her materials slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. The board had delayed their vote. It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't a defeat either. It was time. Time to gather more evidence. Time to build her case stronger. Time to prove she was right. The evening shadows stretched across Vanessa's vandalized office, making the red warning on the wall look even more menacing in the dim light. She sat at her makeshift workspace, a folding table brought in to replace her destroyed desk, trying to focus on case files despite her exhaustion. The events of the day had left her drained, but she couldn't afford to go home. Not yet. The quiet hum of the building's heating system was the only sound breaking the silence. Most of the courthouse staff had left hours ago, leaving the halls eerily empty. Vanessa rubbed her temples, fighting off a headache that had been building since the morning's confrontation with the judicial board. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Her heart rate quickened. After the vandalism and threats, every unexpected sound put her on edge. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the frosted glass. The tall, distinguished figure of Judge Evelyn Porter stood in the hallway. Vanessa hesitated. Porter was one of the most respected judges in the state, known for her unwavering dedication to protocol and procedure. During Vanessa's early years on the bench, Porter had been one of her harshest critics, frequently questioning her methods and decisions. Vanessa opened the door, maintaining a professional facade despite her surprise. Judge Porter. Porter glanced down both ends of the hallway before stepping inside, her movements precise and deliberate. Her steel-gray hair was pulled back in its usual severe bun, and her black judicial robe rustled as she walked. Without a word, she placed a sealed manila envelope on Vanessa's temporary desk. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Porter's face remained carefully neutral, but there was something different in her eyes, a hint of concern, maybe even sympathy. "I can't be seen supporting you," Porter finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood ramrod straight, hands clasped in front of her. "But I don't like what's happening here." Vanessa picked up the envelope carefully as if it might disappear. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind used for official court documents. Her fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside were case files, dozens of them, each marked confidential in bold red letters. As she began to scan the contents, her eyes widened. Page after page revealed a pattern she'd never imagined possible. Morrison's corruption went far beyond protecting a few dirty cops. These documents showed an elaborate network of judicial bribery that spanned years. There were bank statements showing suspicious transfers, transcripts of sealed hearings, and most damning of all, a list of cases where Morrison had intervened, always ruling in favor of certain law firms, certain corporations, certain individuals. The pattern was unmistakable once you saw it. Vanessa's hand shook as she looked through the evidence. This wasn't just about police misconduct anymore. This was systematic corruption at the highest levels of the justice system. Morrison had built an empire of influence, using his position to manipulate cases, protect powerful interests, and eliminate anyone who threatened to expose him. The silence in the room felt different now, charged with the weight of these revelations. Vanessa looked up at Porter, who stood watching her with an unreadable expression. "Why are you helping me?" Vanessa asked, her voice quiet but steady. Porter's carefully maintained composure softened slightly. She looked tired suddenly, the lines around her eyes more pronounced. "Because I remember when I was you." Without another word, Porter turned and walked out, leaving Vanessa alone with the explosive evidence. The door clicked shut softly behind her, the sound echoing in the empty office. Vanessa stared at the closed door, then back at the documents spread across her temporary desk. The red warning on the wall seemed to mock her. But now she understood. This wasn't just about her. This was about the entire system and how deep the corruption really went. She gathered the documents carefully, making sure every page was accounted for. The manila envelope felt heavy in her hands, weighted with more than just paper. It held the truth she'd been searching for, the evidence she needed. But it also carried danger, the kind that had already cost her peace of mind and might cost her much more. The vandalized office around her was a stark reminder of what she was up against. But now, thanks to Porter's unexpected alliance, she had proof. Real, concrete evidence that could bring down not just Morrison, but an entire network of corruption. The building had grown quieter, if possible, as night settled in. Vanessa sat back down at her makeshift desk, the envelope secure in front of her. She knew sleep wouldn't come tonight. There was too much work to do, too much evidence to review. But for the first time since this battle began, she felt something close to hope. The red warning on the wall caught her eye again. This isn't over. They had meant it as a threat, but now it felt like a promise, one she intended to keep. Because they were right. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The midnight silence wrapped around Vanessa's apartment like a thick blanket as she sat at her kitchen table, the stark white overhead light casting harsh shadows across the scattered files before her. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the bottle of whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light as she poured herself 2 fingers worth. The glass made a soft clink against the wooden table as she set it down. She hadn't touched alcohol in months, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like the kind of night that needed something to take the edge off. The manila envelope Judge Porter had given her sat innocently among the spread of documents, but Vanessa knew there was nothing innocent about its contents. Taking a small sip of whiskey, she felt the familiar burn in her throat as she opened the first file. Her eyes widened as she began to read. Bank statements, wire transfers, detailed records of payments flowing between high-powered law firms and offshore accounts linked to Morrison. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars changing hands right under everyone's noses. Her hands shook harder as she moved to the next document. Court records, case dismissals. A pattern emerged that made her stomach churn. Every time a significant payment was made, a ruling followed within days. Morrison had been selling justice to the highest bidder, and he'd been doing it for years. She took another sip of whiskey, larger this time, trying to steady herself. The next file made her set the glass down hard enough that liquid sloshed over the rim. Police misconduct cases, dozens of them. Officers with multiple excessive force complaints, all dismissed by Morrison. The same names kept appearing: Officer Grant, Officer Lewis, and others she recognized. Good cops who tried to report their corrupt colleagues found themselves transferred or forced out. Bad cops kept their badges, protected by Morrison's rubber stamp. The faces of victims began floating through her mind, people who had come to her court seeking justice after Morrison had denied them. She remembered their stories, their pain, their confusion when the system failed them. Now she understood why. They never had a chance. The game had been rigged from the start. Her throat tightened as she picked up another file. This one contained internal memos, emails carefully printed and preserved. Morrison's network wasn't just confined to the courthouse. He had allies in the district attorney's office, in City Hall, in the police department. The corruption spread like a cancer through every level of the justice system. The whiskey sat forgotten as Vanessa dove deeper into the evidence. Each new document revealed another layer of corruption, another connection, another betrayal of public trust. Morrison hadn't just been taking bribes. He'd built an entire empire of corruption, using his position to protect the powerful and punish anyone who threatened to expose the truth. She found records of journalists who had gotten too close to the truth suddenly facing libel suits. Civil rights attorneys who challenged the system found their cases mysteriously reassigned, or their clients pressured to drop charges. Even other judges who showed signs of independence found themselves subtly threatened or marginalized. The kitchen clock ticked steadily in the background as Vanessa methodically worked through the files. Her initial shock gave way to a cold, focused anger. This wasn't just about her career anymore. This wasn't even about Morrison. This was about every person who had ever walked into a courtroom believing in justice, only to find that justice had already been sold to the highest bidder. She thought about her brother Terrence, framed for a crime he didn't commit. Had Morrison's influence reached into his case too? How many other innocent people had been sacrificed to keep this corrupt machine running? The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showed a clear pattern of payments coinciding with favorable rulings. Internal memos revealed the careful orchestration of cases to specific judges. Email chains exposed the coordination between Morrison and his network of corrupt officials. It was all there, documented in black and white. Vanessa's hands steadied as she organized the documents into neat piles. The whiskey sat untouched, no longer needed. The truth was intoxicating enough. Morrison's arrest was just the beginning. These files showed that the real cancer went much deeper, spreading through the entire system like poison. She thought about all the people who had been silenced, all the cases that had been buried, all the justice that had been denied. Each document represented not just a corrupt transaction, but a human cost. Lives ruined, trust betrayed, faith in the system destroyed. Looking at her watch, she realized hours had passed since she first sat down with the files. The night had grown deeper, but sleep was the furthest thing from her mind. The weight of what she had discovered pressed down on her shoulders, but it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like purpose. She closed the final file, letting out a long breath. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but now she had what she needed. The truth, in all its ugly detail, lay spread before her on her kitchen table. Tomorrow, everything changes. The early morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as Vanessa stood in the press room, her heart beating steadily against her ribs. The space was packed wall to wall with reporters, their cameras and microphones pointed at her like weapons. The air felt electric with anticipation. She adjusted her navy blazer, gripping the manila envelope in her hands. The weight of the documents inside felt both heavy and liberating. After a lifetime of fighting for justice from within the system, she was about to blow it wide open. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and unwavering. The room fell silent. "For too long, this courthouse has been ruled by corruption. Today, I'm exposing the truth." She pulled out the first document, holding it up for the cameras. "What I'm about to share with you isn't just about Judge Morrison's individual actions. This is about a systematic corruption that has infected our entire judicial system." The reporters leaned forward, pens poised over notepads. Cameras clicked rapidly. Vanessa could see several live broadcast lights glowing red. "These documents prove that Judge Morrison was running an extensive bribery scheme," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Bank transactions show regular payments from prominent law firms. Cases were bought and sold like commodities. Justice was treated like a business transaction." She laid out document after document, methodically building her case. Here we have evidence of dismissed cases involving police misconduct. Officers with multiple excessive force complaints walked free. Their victims never saw justice. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Several reporters started shouting questions, but Vanessa held up her hand. "Let me finish," she said firmly. "This goes beyond just a few corrupt officers or one corrupt judge. This is about a system that protects its own at the expense of the people it's supposed to serve." She pulled out more files, spreading them across the podium. These documents show a pattern of judicial misconduct spanning years. Cases were dismissed without proper review. Evidence was buried. Lives were ruined. The room erupted into chaos. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions over each other. Camera flashes turned the room into a strobe light. "Judge Langley, how did you obtain these documents? Are you worried about retaliation? What do you say to those who claim you're just seeking attention?" Vanessa raised her voice above the din. "I obtained these documents legally through a confidential source. And yes, I understand the risks of coming forward. But I took an oath to uphold justice, and I intend to honor that oath no matter the personal cost." Her phone buzzed in her pocket, likely the governor's office already scrambling to respond. She ignored it. "The Judicial Board wants to suspend me for speaking out against corruption," she continued. "They claim I'm damaging the integrity of the court. But I ask you, what damages integrity more? Exposing corruption or allowing it to continue?" More questions flew at her. Through the chaos, she noticed her assistant Linda slip into the back of the room, holding up her tablet. The news was already spreading like wildfire online. Judge Langley was trending. The governor's office had issued an emergency statement calling for an immediate investigation. "I have copies of all these documents," Vanessa announced. "They've been sent to multiple news outlets and law enforcement agencies. The truth is out now, and it can't be buried again." She could see several judicial board members watching from the doorway, their faces pale. They hadn't expected this. They thought they could bully her into silence, but she'd just changed the game entirely. "This is bigger than me," she said, her voice softening slightly. "This is about every person who has ever walked into this courthouse seeking justice and been denied because they couldn't afford to pay for it. This is about every officer who abused their power and walked away without consequences. This is about trust in our judicial system." The questions continued, but Vanessa could see her words landing. Reporters were already typing furiously on their phones, breaking the story across social media. News channels were cutting to live coverage. "I'll take a few questions now," she said, pointing to a reporter in the front row. "Judge Langley, what do you hope will come from this?" "Reform," she answered without hesitation. "Complete and total reform of our judicial oversight system. Independent investigations of all cases handled by Judge Morrison and his associates. And justice. Real justice, and for everyone who was denied it." Another reporter stood up. Have you received any threats since beginning this investigation? Vanessa paused, thinking of the vandalized office, the anonymous messages. Yes, but threats don't work on me. They never have. After a few more questions, she gathered her documents. Thank you all for coming. I trust you'll help get this story out to the public. They deserve to know the truth. As she stepped away from the podium, her phone buzzed again. She pulled it out, expecting another news alert or message from the governor's office. Instead, it was a text from an unknown number. You just made a very big mistake. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the message, but she lifted her chin and slipped the phone back into her pocket. The truth was out now. Let them come. The press room was still in chaos behind her, reporters filing their stories, cameras rolling, questions being shouted. But Vanessa walked away with her head high, knowing she'd just changed everything. The judicial board would have no choice but to delay her suspension hearing now, not with the entire city watching. She'd bought herself more time, but more importantly, she'd finally done what she'd sworn to do when she first put on her judge's robes. She'd fought for justice, no matter the cost. The streetlights cast long shadows across Vanessa's dashboard as she drove home, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The events of the day had left her drained, but adrenaline still coursed through her veins. She'd taken her stand, exposed the truth, and now the whole city was buzzing with the revelations. A quick glance at the clock showed 11:45 p.m. The streets were nearly empty, with only the occasional car passing by. Perfect driving conditions, but something felt off. Her instincts, honed by years on the bench, were screaming at her. She checked her rearview mirror and noticed a black SUV about 3 car lengths behind. Nothing unusual about that, she told herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The vehicle had been there for the last 10 minutes, matching her every turn. Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. She'd dealt with threats before. She'd faced down corrupt cops and angry defendants. But this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. She made an unexpected right turn onto Oak Street, away from her usual route home. The SUV followed. Her heart rate picked up. Another turn, this time left onto Maple. Again, the SUV stayed with her. Stay calm, she whispered to herself, gripping the wheel tighter. Think clearly. The SUV suddenly accelerated, closing the gap between them. Its headlights filled her rearview mirror, nearly blinding her. Vanessa's breath caught in her throat as she recognized the deliberate intimidation tactic. She pressed down on the accelerator, taking another sharp turn onto her street. The familiar sight of her house should have brought relief, but instead, her stomach dropped as a dark figure stepped out from behind a parked car and directly into her path. Time seemed to slow down. The figure was tall, dressed entirely in black, wearing a mask that covered their entire face. They moved with purpose, deliberate and threatening. Behind her, the SUV's headlights suddenly went dark. The street plunged into shadow, with only the dim glow of distant streetlights providing any illumination. Vanessa's fingers trembled on the wheel as she brought the car to a stop, her mind racing through possible escape routes. The masked figure stepped forward, placing both hands on her car hood. The metal creaked under their weight as they leaned forward, closer to her windshield. Even through the glass, Vanessa could feel the menace radiating from them. Their face, hidden behind a black mask, tilted slightly as they stared directly at her. Then, slowly and deliberately, they mouthed a single word: enough. Vanessa's heart thundered in her chest, but she refused to look away. Years of facing down threats in her courtroom had taught her one thing: never show fear. She met the masked figure's gaze through the windshield, her jaw set firmly, her eyes steady. The standoff lasted for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. The masked figure's message had been delivered. Without another gesture, they straightened up and stepped back from the car. Their movements were unhurried, confident. They knew they had made their point. As the figure turned and walked away, melting into the shadows between houses, the SUV's engine rumbled to life. Its headlights remained off as it reversed slowly, then turned and drove away into the night, leaving Vanessa alone in the darkness of her street. She sat there, hands still gripping the wheel, forcing herself to take slow, steady breaths. The message had been clear. They wanted her to back down. But they had underestimated her if they thought threats would make her abandon her fight for justice. Still, she couldn't ignore the trembling in her hands or the cold sweat on her forehead. This wasn't just about her career anymore. They had brought the fight to her home, to her personal space. The stakes had just gotten much higher. The street was quiet now, almost too quiet. The normal sounds of the neighborhood, distant traffic, the rustle of trees, the occasional dog bark, seemed muted, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Vanessa remained in her car, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement, any indication that the threat hadn't truly passed. The first rays of dawn crept through Vanessa's kitchen window, casting a pale glow across her untouched coffee mug. Steam still rose from the dark liquid, but she hadn't taken a single sip. Her mind was racing, replaying the events of last night, the SUV, the masked figure, the threat that was meant to silence her. But they had made a crucial mistake. Instead of fear, they had ignited something far more dangerous. Pure, unrelenting fury. She grabbed her phone, her fingers moving with determined precision as she dialed Gabriel's number. The phone rang 3 times before a groggy voice answered. "Judge?" Gabriel's voice was thick with sleep. "Get to the courthouse early," Vanessa said, her tone sharp and clear. "I need you to pull every document linked to Morrison's network. We end this today." There was a pause, then rustling sounds as Gabriel presumably sat up in bed. "Everything?" That could be hundreds of files. "Everything," Vanessa confirmed. "Start with his case dismissals from the past 5 years, then work backward. Focus on cases involving police misconduct, corporate settlements, and any ruling where the outcome didn't match the evidence." Gabriel's voice grew stronger, more alert. "You're going for the kill shot." "They tried to intimidate me last night," Vanessa said, her free hand clenching into a fist. "They thought they could scare me into submission. Instead, they showed me exactly how desperate they are." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, Gabriel said, determination evident in his voice. After hanging up, Vanessa immediately dialed Linda's number. Her assistant answered on the first ring, already awake and ready. "Linda, I need you to do something crucial," Vanessa began. "Pull all the security footage from the courthouse parking lot for the past month. Every camera, every angle. And I need you to get me the visitor logs for Morrison's chambers. Anyone who came to see him privately." "Consider it done," Linda replied without hesitation. "Anything else?" "Yes. If anyone asks what we're doing, we're preparing for next week's cases. Nothing more." "Understood, Judge." Vanessa ended the call and stood up, walking to her window. The street outside was quiet, peaceful even. No sign of the black SUV or masked figures now. They probably thought she would spend the day cowering in her home, paralyzed by fear. They were about to learn how wrong they were. She picked up her phone one final time, dialing a number she'd kept but never used. Until now. "Federal Bureau of Investigation, how may I direct your call?" "This is Judge Vanessa Langley from the State Superior Court," she said, her voice steady and authoritative. "I need to speak with someone from Public Corruption." A few transfers later, she was connected to a senior agent. "I have evidence of systemic corruption inside the judicial system," Vanessa stated clearly. "Multiple judges, law enforcement officers, and high-ranking officials are involved. I'm ready to hand it over." The agent's voice sharpened with interest. "How extensive is this evidence, Your Honor?" "Enough to bring down an entire network that's been operating for years. Bank records, case files, witness statements, everything you need for a federal investigation." "We can have agents at your office within the hour." "No," Vanessa said firmly. "Not at the courthouse. We meet on neutral ground. There are too many compromised individuals in the building." They arranged a meeting location and Vanessa hung up the phone. She stood in her kitchen, the morning light now streaming fully through her windows. Her coffee had gone cold, untouched, and forgotten. For days she'd been playing defense, reacting to their attacks, dodging their blows, trying to stay one step ahead of their smear campaign. But that ended now. No more running, no more hiding, no more careful political maneuvering. They wanted to play hardball? Fine. She would show them exactly what that meant. She closed her phone and took a deep breath, letting it out slowly. The fury that had been burning in her chest all morning crystallized into something harder, sharper, pure determination. They had tried to break her, to force her out, to silence her voice, and instead, they had given her the perfect reason to tear their whole corrupt system down to the ground. The morning light caught the badge on her judicial robe hanging by the door. The scales of justice gleamed, reminding her of everything she had sworn to protect. She had spent her entire career fighting for justice within the system, believing she could change things from the inside. Now she would prove that belief wasn't misplaced. She exhaled, squaring her shoulders. No more playing defense. It was time to take them down. Her phone buzzed with a text from Gabriel. "Already here, starting on the files." Another from Linda. "Security footage downloading. Visitor logs secured." The pieces were falling into place. After years of watching Morrison and his cronies twist the law to serve their own interests, after seeing countless people denied justice because they couldn't afford to buy it, after witnessing the slow corruption of everything she held sacred, it was finally time. They had tried to intimidate her last night, thinking their show of force would make her back down. Instead, they had only proven how much they feared her, how much they knew she could hurt them if she ever decided to go all in. Well, she was all in now, and they were about to learn exactly why they should have been afraid. The grand hearing chamber of the courthouse loomed before Vanessa like a gladiator's arena. Ornate wooden panels lined the walls, and heavy velvet curtains draped the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. The room buzzed with nervous energy as dozens of eyes followed her every move. Vanessa's heels clicked against the floor as she made her way to the defendant's table. Her navy suit was crisp, her posture straight as steel. She could feel the weight of the secret files in her briefcase, pressing against her side like a shield. The gallery was packed with spectators, journalists scribbling in notepads, law enforcement officials whispering among themselves, and Morrison's remaining allies, their faces tight with barely concealed anxiety. Camera flashes punctuated the tense atmosphere like lightning in a gathering storm. At the elevated bench before her sat the Judicial Ethics Panel, 7 of the most powerful judges in the state. In the center, Judge Malcolm Bennett's stern face betrayed nothing as he shuffled through the papers before him. His silver hair caught the light from the chandeliers above, creating a halo effect that seemed almost ironic given the circumstances. "This ethics hearing is now in session," Bennett's voice boomed through the chamber. The rustling and whispers immediately died down. "We are here to address serious allegations of judicial misconduct against Judge Vanessa Langley." Vanessa remained perfectly still, her hands folded on the table before her. She could feel beads of sweat forming at the back of her neck, but her face remained impassive. Bennett cleared his throat. "The charges include abuse of judicial authority, compromising the integrity of the court, and bringing the judiciary into disrepute through reckless actions." He paused, his eyes meeting Vanessa's. "Judge Langley, you stand accused of judicial misconduct. Before we begin, do you have anything to say in your defense?" The room held its breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. Would she back down? Apologize? Beg for mercy? Vanessa slowly rose from her chair. The sound of wood scraping against marble seemed to echo through the chamber. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out the stack of files, placing them deliberately on the table before her. "I'm not here to defend myself," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I'm here to expose the truth." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly. "For years," Vanessa continued, "this courthouse has been corrupted by a network of judges, lawyers, and law enforcement officials who have turned justice into a commodity to be bought and sold." She opened the first file. "I have evidence of systematic bribery, case-fixing, and criminal cover-ups orchestrated by Judge Richard Morrison and his associates." The murmur grew louder. Bennett banged his gavel. "Order." But Vanessa pressed on. "On March 15th of last year, Judge Morrison received a payment of $50,000 from the Harrison law firm. 3 days later, he dismissed a multi-million-dollar lawsuit against their client." She pulled out a bank statement. The money was routed through 3 different shell companies before reaching his offshore account. She saw Morrison's closest ally, Judge Thompson, shift uncomfortably in his seat. In April, he buried evidence of police brutality in the Carter case. The officers involved had previously made substantial contributions to a foundation controlled by Morrison's wife. Another document joined the growing pile of evidence. I have the transfer records right here. The room erupted in chaos. Reporters were furiously taking notes, cameras clicking frantically. Several of Morrison's associates had gone deathly pale. In June, Vanessa's voice cut through the noise. Morrison orchestrated the dismissal of 7 separate misconduct cases against officers Grant and Lewis. Each dismissal was followed by mysterious deposits into accounts linked to Morrison's family members. Judge Bennett's face had grown increasingly grave. "These are serious allegations, Judge Langley." "They're not allegations," Vanessa replied firmly. "They're facts, and there's more." She pulled out another file. "This documents every case Morrison influenced over the past 5 years. Every bribe, every cover-up, every abuse of power." She looked directly at Bennett. "And the names of everyone involved." The tension in the room was suffocating. Several members of the ethics panel were whispering urgently to each other. Morrison's allies looked like they wanted to disappear into their seats. "I have copies of all these documents," Vanessa added, her voice hard. "They've been sent to the FBI, the State Attorney General's office, and several trusted members of the press. There's no burying this anymore." Judge Bennett's face had turned ashen. He leaned forward, examining the documents spread before him. The other panel members were doing the same, their expressions ranging from shock to dismay to outrage. After what felt like an eternity, Bennett straightened up. "In light of these revelations, this panel needs to enter emergency discussions." He banged his gavel. "We will recess for 1 hour." Vanessa sat back down, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The room erupted in chaos once again as the panel members filed out. Reporters were shouting questions, photographers jostling for better angles, and Morrison's allies were practically running for the exits. She remained seated perfectly still as the storm raged around her. She had done it. She had turned the tables. Now all she could do was wait. The setting sun painted the city skyline in hues of orange and pink as Vanessa stood on the courthouse rooftop. The cool evening breeze tugged at her suit jacket, carrying with it the faint sounds of traffic below. Up here, away from the chaos that had consumed her life these past weeks, she could finally breathe. Her hands rested on the concrete barrier, fingers tracing the rough surface as she took in the view. The courthouse steps where she'd made her stand, the parking lot where she'd received that first threatening note, the media vans that had become permanent fixtures. It all looked so small from up here. Exhaustion weighed heavy on her shoulders. The day's hearing had drained every ounce of energy she had left. Her throat still felt raw from speaking truth to power, from naming names and exposing corruption that had festered for years. The vibration of her phone startled her from her thoughts. She pulled it from her pocket, expecting another threat, another battle to fight. Instead, the breaking news alert made her grip the phone tighter. Breaking State Supreme Court to intervene in Judge Vanessa Langley case, all charges under review. Her breath caught in her throat. The words blurred as tears welled in her eyes. She blinked them away, reading the headline again and again to make sure it was real. The Supreme Court. They were stepping in. After weeks of fighting alone, of being dragged through the mud, of facing threats and intimidation, finally, someone was listening. She leaned against the barrier, legs suddenly weak. The evening air felt cooler now, fresher somehow. Below, she could see people pointing at their phones, no doubt reading the same news. A small crowd had already begun to gather at the courthouse steps. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number. She hesitated for just a moment before answering. "Judge Langley?" A firm, professional voice came through. "This is Special Agent Marcus Chen with the FBI." Vanessa straightened, her grip tightening on the phone. "Yes?" "I wanted to inform you personally that we've initiated an investigation into multiple high-ranking officials based on the evidence you provided. Your documentation was critical in getting this approved." She closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her. The FBI was involved now. Really involved. "We'll need your continued cooperation," Agent Chen continued. "There are a lot of powerful people implicated in these files." "You'll have it," Vanessa said, her voice steady despite the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Whatever you need." "Good. We'll be in touch soon with next steps." There was a pause. "And Judge Langley? What you did, coming forward like this, it took real courage." After they hung up, Vanessa remained still, letting everything sink in. For the first time in weeks, she felt something unexpected stirring in her chest. Hope. Not just for herself, but for every person who had been denied justice by Morrison's corrupt network. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the rooftop. Traffic continued to flow below. People went about their lives, but everything felt different now. The weight that had been pressing down on her for weeks had lifted, if only slightly. She thought about Gabriel, who had stood by her when everyone else stepped away. About Linda, who had kept her office running despite the chaos. About Judge Porter, who had risked her own position to pass along those crucial files. Her phone buzzed again, messages flooding in from reporters seeking comment on the Supreme Court's intervention. She ignored them for now. This moment, this victory, however small, was hers to savor. The breeze picked up, carrying with it the first hints of evening coolness. Vanessa tilted her head back, looking up at the darkening sky. She let out a slow, steady breath, releasing weeks of tension, fear, and uncertainty. This battle wasn't over. She knew that. There would be more fights ahead, more attempts to silence her, more powerful people trying to protect their interests. But for the first time since this all began, she was winning. The truth was finally coming to light, and not even the most powerful judges in the city could stop it now. She stood there on the rooftop, watching as the city lights began to twinkle on one by one, a quiet witness to her moment of triumph. The same skyline that had seemed so oppressive just weeks ago now felt like it was opening up before her, full of possibility. The sound of the rooftop door opening behind her barely registered. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the last rays of sunlight were painting the clouds in brilliant shades of gold. The Supreme Court chamber hummed with tension as Vanessa sat in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The polished wood panels and towering columns seemed to press in around her, making the already solemn room feel even more imposing. Journalists packed the gallery behind her, their pens poised over notepads, waiting. The Chief Justice, a distinguished woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, adjusted her reading glasses. The rustle of paper echoed through the silent chamber as she lifted the court's decision. Vanessa's heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the formal opening statements. She focused on her breathing, just as she'd done through countless difficult moments in her own courtroom. In and out, slow and steady. After careful review of all evidence presented, the Chief Justice began, her voice clear and authoritative. This court finds the allegations against Judge Vanessa Langley to be without merit. The words hung in the air for a moment before she continued. Furthermore, the evidence she brought forward regarding systematic corruption within the judicial system has been thoroughly investigated and verified. All charges against Judge Langley are hereby dismissed. Relief crashed over Vanessa like a wave. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. Years of fighting, weeks of isolation and threats, days of uncertainty, all of it washed away with those simple words. But the Chief Justice wasn't finished. In light of the extensive evidence of judicial misconduct, this court orders the immediate disbarment of Judge Richard Morrison. Her gaze swept the chamber. Additionally, a full investigation will be conducted into all cases handled by Judge Morrison and his associates over the past decade. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Vanessa remained perfectly still, her face composed despite the triumph surging through her chest. The next hour passed in a blur of legal declarations and official pronouncements. One by one, the dominoes began to fall. 3 judges who had been part of Morrison's network submitted their resignations before the session even ended. 2 others were placed under immediate investigation. The Chief Justice outlined a comprehensive reform package, new oversight committees, stricter ethical guidelines, Independent review boards. Everything Vanessa had fought for was becoming reality. She caught glimpses of Morrison during the proceedings. He sat 3 rows behind her, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled, his face ashen. The man who had tried to destroy her career, who had threatened and intimidated her, now looked small and defeated. Linda, her assistant, squeezed her hand as the reforms were announced. Gabriel, sitting on her other side, couldn't stop grinning. They had stood by her when everyone else stepped away. They had believed in her when the entire system turned against her. The Chief Justice's voice cut through her thoughts. Let today's ruling serve as a reminder that no one is above the law. The integrity of our judicial system depends on those brave enough to defend it, even at great personal cost. Vanessa felt those words settle deep in her chest. She thought of her brother, wrongly accused all those years ago. She thought of every person who had been denied justice because of corruption. She thought of Judge Porter, who had risked her career to help expose the truth. As the session concluded, reporters began shouting questions. Camera flashes lit up the chamber. But Vanessa remained seated for a moment, letting the reality sink in. She had won, not just for herself, but for everything she believed in, for everyone who had ever faced a system that seemed too big to fight. When she finally stood, her legs were steady. She smoothed her jacket, lifted her chin, and walked toward the doors. The reporters parted before her, still calling out questions. She could hear the chaos erupting behind her. Morrison being led away by his lawyers, other judges rushing to release statements, journalists racing to file their stories. But for Vanessa, there was only the quiet satisfaction of vindication. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if the weight she'd carried for so long was finally lifting. She pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the Supreme Court chamber. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, bright and clear. A perfect day for justice. Gabriel and Linda flanked her as she walked through the marble hallway. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The victory belonged to all of them. At the top of the courthouse steps, Vanessa paused. Below her, a sea of reporters waited. But they couldn't touch her now. Nothing could. She had faced down threats in dark parking lots. She had endured isolation and betrayal. She had stood her ground when the entire system tried to crush her. And she had won. Not just survived, but transformed the very institution that had tried to destroy her. The reforms would ensure that no other judge would have to fight this battle alone. This wasn't just a personal victory. It was a victory for justice itself. As she descended the steps, head held high, Vanessa felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. Peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you fought the right fight, no matter the cost. The weight of those difficult weeks, the sleepless nights, the constant fear, the crushing loneliness, lifted with each step. Behind her, the Supreme Court's decision was already reshaping the judicial landscape. Before her lay a future where integrity mattered more than power. She had won, not by compromising her principles, not by backing down, but by standing firm in her belief that justice must prevail. The courthouse doors swung shut behind her, closing one chapter and opening another. She had entered those doors weeks ago as a judge under siege. She walked out now as a symbol of what one person's courage could achieve. Sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors as Vanessa Langley walked through the main entrance. Her heels clicked against the polished stone, each step purposeful and measured. The security guards who once eyed her with suspicion now stood at attention, offering respectful nods as she passed. The familiar scent of old books and wood polish filled her nostrils, but everything felt different now. The courthouse that had once been a battlefield was now her domain. Staff members stepped aside, some smiling, others watching with a mix of awe and lingering uncertainty. The whispers that followed her were no longer filled with judgment, but with reverence. "Good morning, Chief Judge Langley," her assistant Linda called out, falling into step beside her. The new title still felt strange, but Vanessa carried it with the same quiet dignity she'd shown throughout her fight for justice. "Morning, Linda," Vanessa replied, accepting a stack of files. "How many cases do we have today?" 15 on the docket, and the press is still requesting interviews about the reforms. Vanessa nodded. remembering how this same hallway had once been filled with reporters hurling accusations. Now they wanted to tell a different story, one of triumph and transformation. The chief judge's chambers were larger than her old office, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Someone had placed a fresh vase of lilies on her desk, probably Linda's doing. The nameplate gleamed, Chief Judge Vanessa Langley. She ran her fingers along the smooth wood of her new desk, thinking of all the battles it had taken to get here, the threats, the smear campaigns, the vandalism. All of it had led to this moment. But she wasn't here to savor her victory. She was here to work. Vanessa settled into her chair and opened the first case file. The morning light warmed her face as she studied the documents, already making notes in her precise handwriting. This was what she had fought for. The chance to continue serving justice, but now with the power to ensure the system worked as it should. A knock at her door interrupted her concentration. "Come in," she called out, not looking up from her work. "Judge Langley?" The familiar voice made her pause. She looked up to find Gabriel Torres standing in her doorway, dressed in a crisp suit that made him look older than she remembered. His eyes still held that same earnest determination she'd always admired. "Gabriel," she said warmly, gesturing for him to enter. "I heard you started law school." He stepped inside, clutching his messenger bag. "First semester," he confirmed, a mix of pride and nervousness in his voice. I wanted to come see you on your first day as chief judge." Vanessa set down her pen, giving him her full attention. She could see in his stance, in the way he held himself, that he had more to say. "You showed me what one person can do," Gabriel continued, his voice growing stronger. "When everyone was against you, when they tried to silence you, you kept fighting. You didn't just expose corruption, you changed the entire system." He took a deep breath. "I want to be like you, Judge Langley. I want to fight for what's right, no matter the cost." Vanessa studied him for a moment, remembering the young intern who had stood by her side when others fled. He had been one of the few who believed in her, who reminded her why the fight mattered. "Then be ready to fight," she said, rising from her chair. She picked up her gavel, the symbol of her authority, but also of her responsibility. "Because the work we do isn't easy, Gabriel. It requires courage, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to justice." She walked around her desk to stand before him. "But if you're willing to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, then you'll make a fine lawyer." Gabriel straightened his shoulders, and Vanessa saw in him the same fire that had driven her all these years. "I'm ready," he said firmly. Vanessa nodded, a smile crossing her face. "Good, because we have work to do." She turned toward her desk where the day's cases awaited her attention. The morning sun caught the polished surface of her gavel, and as she lifted it, she felt the weight of both her victory and her responsibility. The new chapter of her life was beginning, and she was ready to write it with the same courage and conviction that had brought her here. Justice had prevailed in her own fight, but there were still battles to be won, wrongs to be righted, and a system to be maintained with integrity and fairness. If you enjoyed the story of Vanessa, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. If you enjoyed the story of Vanessa, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.